They told me they were just helping the same morning. A pharmacist quietly slid my prescription back across the counter and said my insurance had been canceled 3 months ago. That was the moment I realized I had $14, a stranger's sympathy, and no idea where my money was going. Hi, everyone. It always starts gently, doesn't it? We're helping. You don't need to worry. And then one day you're standing somewhere public, feeling small, realizing something isn't right. Tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone with your money because they were family? I'm Maribel Quince. I'm 72 years old, and until that morning, I believed I had my life arranged in neat, predictable rows, like the spice jars in my kitchen, labeled in my own careful handwriting. Tarragon, smoked paprika, dried bay leaves I still bought even though I barely cooked for anyone anymore. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling. After Orville died, 48 years married, just like that, gone in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and overboiled coffee, I learned how to be precise. I tracked every bill, every deposit, every small indulgence. My pension came in on the second Wednesday of every month. My savings sat quietly, growing just enough to make me feel safe. And then my son Rowan decided I shouldn't have to handle all that stress. It started small. It always does. "Mom, you missed a letter from the electric company," he said one afternoon, holding up an envelope I hadn't even seen. "Why don't we forward your mail to us?" Just to make sure nothing slips. Celeste, his wife, stood behind him with that soft smile she wore like perfume. "It's not about control, Maribel. It's about peace of mind." Peace of mind. Such a pretty phrase. I remember laughing lightly, brushing flour off my hands from the pie I'd been making. "I've been paying my own bills since before you were born, Rowan." "I know," he said, already halfway to the door with the envelope. "But you shouldn't have to anymore." That was the first piece they took. Not money, not yet, just visibility. A few weeks later, Rowan called me while I was trying to fix the old radio Orville had loved. A stubborn bakelite thing that only played properly when you tapped it twice on the side. "Mom, your bank called me," he said. I straightened. "Why would they call you?" "You listed me as emergency contact years ago, remember? They said there was an issue with one of your automatic payments. I handled it." "You handled it?" I repeated. "Relax," he chuckled. "We're just helping." That phrase again. After that, things moved faster. Not fast enough to feel like an attack, just fast enough to feel convenient. Celeste started picking up my prescriptions on her way back from Luminara, her skincare studio with its polished marble counters and cucumber-infused water. Rowan took my car for a quick checkup that somehow turned into 2 weeks without it. My mail stopped arriving altogether, and when I asked, Celeste would say, "Oh, nothing important. Just coupons and statements. We've got it under control." Under control. I didn't notice the pattern at first because nothing broke all at once. The lights stayed on. The water ran. The fridge was full. Celeste insisted on dropping off groceries, always organic, always things I didn't usually buy. Fennel, blood oranges, little jars of imported fig preserve that tasted too sweet for my liking. It felt like care. It looked like care. But care shouldn't make you feel like a guest in your own life. The first real crack appeared 3 days before the pharmacy. I had been looking for my pension folder, the thick blue one I kept in the second drawer of my desk, beneath Orville's old letters and a bundle of receipts tied with twine. I opened the drawer, expecting the familiar weight of paper. It wasn't there. I pulled everything out: letters, receipts, a dried sprig of lavender from a summer long gone. But no folder. I told myself I'd moved it. At 72, you're expected to misplace things. People forgive you before you even ask. Still, something felt wrong. Not forgotten. Removed. That night, I called Rowan. "Have you seen my pension folder?" I asked. There was a pause on the line, just a fraction too long. "Mom," he said slowly, "you don't need to keep all that stuff anymore. It's confusing." "It wasn't confusing yesterday." Another pause, then a sigh. "Celeste and I organized some of your paperwork when we came by last week. It's safer this way." "Safer for who?" I asked before I could stop myself. "For you," he replied quickly. Too quickly. I let it go. That's what I'd always done. Let things go for the sake of peace. But the next morning, standing in that pharmacy with my prescription pushed back toward me like something I couldn't afford, I realized something very simple. Peace had been expensive, and I had no idea how much I'd already paid for it. When I got home from the pharmacy, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood there in the hallway, holding that small paper bag with my name on it. Maribel Quince, printed neatly, like nothing in my life had shifted. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, something unfamiliar. Celeste had been here again. I could tell without seeing her. She always left traces, not obvious ones. Subtle things. A dish moved half an inch, a chair angled differently. Once she replaced my coarse sea salt with a pink Himalayan one in a glass jar, as if my kitchen needed improving. I walked slowly into the living room. My shoes made that same soft creak on the third floorboard near the window. Unchanged, at least that. The old radio sat where I left it, silent, stubborn. For a moment, I focused on that instead of the knot forming in my chest. Then I saw the envelope. It was lying on the small oak table by the door. My name was on it again, this time handwritten. Bank of Harrow Bend. The flap had been opened and resealed with a thin strip of transparent tape. Too neat to be accidental, too careless to be invisible. I didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, I set the pharmacy bag down and went into the kitchen. I filled the kettle, watched the water rise to that familiar line, listened to it begin its low murmur before boiling. I needed something ordinary, something I understood. When the kettle clicked off, I poured the water over a chamomile bag I'd been using for years. The same brand, same box, same quiet routine. My hands weren't shaking yet. That came later. I carried the cup back to the hallway table and finally sat down. The envelope felt lighter than it should have. Inside was a printed notice. Formal, clean, cold. Mailing address update confirmation. I read it once, then again. My official mailing address for all account correspondence had been changed, effective immediately, to Rowan and Celeste's home on Alderwick Drive. I hadn't signed anything for that. I would have remembered. There was a line at the bottom. If you did not authorize this change, please contact your branch within 30 days. 30 days. I looked at the date. 27 had already passed. For a long time, I just stared at that number. 27 days of letters I never saw. Statements I never read. Notices I never opened. 27 days of silence that hadn't felt like silence at all, because someone else had been listening in my place. I took a slow sip of tea. It had already gone lukewarm. That's when I noticed something else. The drawer. My desk sat against the far wall of the living room beneath a framed photograph of Orville holding a fishing rod and smiling like the sun was made just for him. The second drawer, the one that always stuck a little unless you pulled it just right. It was slightly open, just enough to notice. I set the cup down and walked over, each step heavier than the last. I told myself it was nothing, that I'd left it that way, that I was imagining patterns because of one bad morning. I pulled it open fully. The contents had been rearranged, not messy, not chaotic. That would have been easier to understand. No, this was deliberate, organized, clean in a way that erased history instead of preserving it. Orville's letters were stacked in a tighter bundle. The twine I'd used for years had been replaced with a thin, elastic band. My old receipts, ones I kept not because I needed them, but because they reminded me of who I'd been, were gone entirely. And the blue folder, the one labeled in my own handwriting, slightly slanted because I'd rushed it that day. It was still missing. I knelt down slowly, my knees protesting the hardwood, and checked the lower drawers. Then the cabinet. Then the box under the desk where I kept old magazines and a chipped teacup I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Nothing. I sat back on my heels and let the quiet settle around me. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't age. Someone had gone through my things and decided what I was allowed to keep. The phone rang behind me, sharp and sudden. I flinched. Actually flinched in my own house. I stood up too quickly, grabbed the receiver. Hello? Maribel? Celeste's voice flowed through the line, smooth and warm like honey poured over something bitter. I was just about to call you. Of course she was. I got a letter from the bank, I said, keeping my voice even. About my address. A brief pause. Barely there, but I heard it. Oh, that, she said lightly. Yes, Rowan handled that. It's just easier if everything comes through us. Less stress for you. I didn't agree to that. Another pause. This one longer. Maribel, she said gently, as if explaining something to a child. You've been a bit overwhelmed lately. We thought it would help to simplify things. I'm not overwhelmed. Of course, she replied quickly. And we're not saying you are. We're just supporting you. You know that. Supporting, helping, protecting. All these soft words that didn't ask permission. I walked slowly back to the table and looked down at the envelope again. At the tape. At the evidence that my life was being opened, read, and sealed back up without me. My pension folder is gone, I said. This time, there was no immediate answer. Then Celeste sighed softly, like she was the one dealing with something difficult. We reorganized some paperwork when we visited last week, she said. It was getting a bit scattered. It wasn't scattered, I replied. Maribel, she said, a hint of impatience slipping through now. You don't need to worry about all that anymore. We're taking care of it. There it was again. Not asking. Telling. I looked around my house. The walls, the furniture, the small objects that had stayed loyal to me for decades. And for the first time, something inside me shifted. A quiet realization. If they were taking care of everything, then what exactly was left for me? I'd like it back, I said. The folder? Yes. Another pause. I'll see what I can find, Celeste replied. No promises. Rowan might have moved some things into storage already. Storage? The word landed heavier than anything else she'd said. Storage? I repeated. Just temporary, she added quickly. You know, decluttering, making things easier for you in the long run. Easier. I closed my eyes for a second, gripping the edge of the table. "My things aren't clutter," I said quietly. "Of course not," she replied, already retreating into politeness. "We'll talk about this later, all right? Rowan's busy right now. I'll call you this evening." The line went dead before I could answer. I stood there, listening to the empty hum. Then I looked back at the envelope. 27 days, a missing folder, opened mail, and now, storage. I didn't feel confused. I felt something much sharper than that. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside, just enough to see the street. Quiet, still, the same as always. But for the first time in years, I had the unmistakable feeling that something had already begun, long before I noticed. And whatever it wasn't help. Juniper came by just before sunset, knocking twice the way she always had since she was a child, quick, then softer, like she didn't want to startle the house. I hadn't called her. I hadn't called anyone. But somehow, she knew. When I opened the door, she stood there in that oversized charcoal coat she wore even when the weather didn't quite call for it, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, hair tied back with a piece of twine instead of anything proper. She looked at me carefully, not smiling yet. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, Juniper." There was a pause. Not awkward, just attentive. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I slept," I replied. "Just not well." She nodded, like that made perfect sense, and stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Juniper had always done that, moved like she belonged where she stood. Not entitled. Just certain. She set her bag down on the kitchen table and pulled out a small container. "I brought you lentil soup, with cumin. You said last winter it helped your joints." "I did say that." "I remember things," she added quietly. That almost made me smile. We sat across from each other, the steam from the soup rising between us. For a while, we didn't talk about anything important. She told me about a restoration project she was working on. An old wooden cabinet with hidden compartments, the kind people used to build when they expected someone might go looking through their things. "People used to be clever about hiding what mattered," she said, stirring her soup. "Now, everything's just passwords and assumptions." I looked at her then. Really looked. "Juniper," I said slowly, "have your parents said anything about my paperwork? My mail?" Her spoon stopped midair. "No," she said at first. Too quickly. Then she lowered it into the bowl and added, "Not directly." Indirectly. She exhaled through her nose, thinking. "Mom mentioned you were getting overwhelmed with finances. That you'd ask them to step in." I didn't. "I figured," she said. That was the thing about Juniper. She didn't need convincing. I hesitated for a moment, then stood up and walked to the living room. "Come here," I said. She followed me, quiet, alert. I showed her the envelope, the tape, the notice. She read it once, then again, slower. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "They changed your address without you signing this?" she asked. "Yes. That's not normal." "No," I said. "It isn't." She handed the paper back to me and leaned against the table, arms crossed. "There's more, isn't there?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. "My pension folder is gone, and Celeste said some of my things might already be in storage." That got a reaction. Juniper straightened. "Storage?" That's the word she used. She went very still for a second, like she was deciding how much to say. "Grandma?" she began carefully. I wasn't sure if it mattered or if I was misreading it, but a few days ago I was at the house, in the garage. My chest tightened slightly. And? There were boxes, she said, stacked near the back wall, not random stuff, your stuff. What kind of things? Your sewing kit, the old tin with the blue lid, the porcelain bird from your mantel. I think I saw Grandpa's compass, too. I felt the air shift in my lungs. And? I asked quietly. Juniper swallowed. They weren't labeled Grandma's things. How were they labeled? She hesitated just a fraction too long. Juniper. She looked me straight in the eyes then. Estate. Just estate. Q. The room went very quiet. Estate. That wasn't a word you used for someone who was still standing in front of you. That's terminology, I said slowly, hearing Celeste's voice echo in my head before she'd even said it out loud. Yeah, Juniper replied. It is. For auctions. I turned away, gripping the edge of the table. The wood felt solid under my hands. Real. Still mine, for now. They said they were helping, I murmured. Juniper didn't answer right away. Then, softly, helping with what? I didn't have an answer. But for the first time, I wasn't just uneasy. I was starting to understand the shape of it, and it didn't look like help at all. The next morning, I didn't wait for Rowan to call. I dressed slower than usual, choosing things deliberately. A dark wool coat, the one with the deep inner pocket, my sensible shoes. The brooch with the tiny enamel lilies Orville once said made me look too elegant for a woman who fixes her own sink. I pinned it anyway. If I was going to walk into something unpleasant, I would do it properly. The bus to Harrow Bend Credit Union smelled faintly of diesel and old vinyl. I sat by the window, watching the town pass by in quiet layers. Closed storefronts, a bakery setting out trays of still warm cardamom buns, a man hosing down the pavement like yesterday could be washed away if you used enough water. I tried to think clearly, not emotionally. Clearly. Money leaves trails. That had always been true. Even when people lie, numbers tend to stay honest. The bank lobby was warmer than I expected. Too bright. Too clean. The kind of place that makes you feel like everything inside it must be in order. A young woman at the front desk smiled at me. Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you? I need to speak with someone about my accounts, I said. Privately. She hesitated only a second before nodding. Of course. One moment. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a man in a glass-walled office. His nameplate read, Silas Thorne. Mid-40s, neatly trimmed beard, the kind of eyes that measured before reacting. Mrs. Quince, he said, folding his hands. What seems to be the issue? I placed the envelope on his desk, the one with the tape. My mailing address was changed without my consent, I said, and I'd like to review all activity on my accounts for the past 6 months. He didn't touch the envelope right away, just looked at it, then at me. Do you have family assisting you with account management? He asked carefully. My son, I replied. Apparently. That was enough. Silas turned his monitor slightly away from me and began typing. The soft clicks of the keyboard filled the room. I watched his face as the data loaded. At first, nothing changed. Then something did. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight tightening around his eyes. A pause between keystrokes. Mrs. Quince, he said slowly, there is a secondary access authorization on your account. Your son, Rowan Quince, has viewing and limited transfer permissions. I never gave him transfer permission. He didn't argue, just nodded once. Would you like me to print a transaction summary? Yes. The printer behind him came to life with a low mechanical hum. Page after page slid out, orderly, precise, unforgiving. He gathered them, aligned the edges, and placed the stack in front of me. Take your time, he said. I did. The first few lines looked normal. Utilities, groceries, a pharmacy charge from 2 months ago, before Celeste started handling that. Then the pattern shifted. Regular transfers. Same date every month. Alderwick Mortgage, Rowan Quince. I stared at it. Next line. Velour Auto Leasing, Premium SUV. Then, Luminara Skin Studio, business expense. My fingers pressed harder into the paper. There were more. The Brass Fig Restaurant, Callum Quince Tuition Services, and then one that didn't fit with anything else. Holloway Storage and Auction Services. That one sat there quietly, almost hiding among the others. I read it twice. Mr. Thorne, I said without looking up. What is Holloway Storage? He leaned slightly forward, scanning the page. A third-party storage and liquidation company, he replied. They handle asset holding and auctions. Auctions. The word landed the same way estate had yesterday. Slow, heavy, final. I flipped another page. More transfers. Different dates. Smaller amounts, but steady. Consistent. Intentional. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a system. I'd like copies of all of this, I said. Of course. He hesitated, then added, Mrs. Quince, I need to ask, are you aware of these transactions? I lifted my eyes to his. No, I said. I am not. Silas nodded again, more firmly this time. There are procedures we can initiate, he said, but I'll be transparent. If the authorization was signed, it complicates things. Show me. He turned the monitor toward me. There it was. My name, my signature, or something very close to it. At first glance, it looked right. The same flow, the same curve in the M. But I leaned closer. There was a flaw. In my signature, the Q in Quince always dipped lower, slightly exaggerated. Something Orville used to tease me about. This one didn't. It was almost perfect, but not quite mine. I sat back slowly. They practiced, I said quietly. Silas didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. I placed my hand flat on the stack of papers. All of it, I said. Every transaction, every authorization. I want copies. You'll have them, he replied. I gathered the pages when he handed them over, feeling the weight of them settle into my arms. Not just paper, evidence, proof that something had been taken piece by piece while I was being told I was safe. When I stood to leave, Silas spoke again. If you intend to stop this, he said carefully, you should do it quickly. I paused at the door. I intend to understand it first, I replied. Then I stepped out of the office and into the bright, orderly lobby. For everyone else, it was just another morning. For me, it was the moment the numbers stopped being numbers and started telling a story I hadn't been allowed to hear. Rowan called me that evening, not a message. Not Celeste relaying something softened and polished. Him. Mom, he said, voice steady, almost rehearsed. Why were you at the bank today? So he already knew. I sat at the kitchen table, the stack of printed transactions resting beside my cup. I hadn't touched the tea. It had gone cold again. I needed clarity, I replied. A pause. You could have just asked me. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, would you have told me the truth? Silence. Then a soft exhale. This is exactly what I was worried about, he said. You're getting anxious over things you don't fully understand. There it was. Not denial, reframing. I understand numbers just fine, I said calmly. I saw the transfers, Rowan. Another pause. Longer this time. It's not what it looks like. It looks like my pension is paying your mortgage. That's temporary, he replied quickly. We were going to explain everything. You get overwhelmed, Mom. We didn't want to stress you. I glanced at the papers again, line after line, month after month. And the storage company? I asked. What about it? Holloway Storage. This time, the silence had weight. That's just logistics, he said finally. We've been organizing some of your things. The house is too full. You said that yourself. I said it had memories, I corrected, not that it needed emptying. His tone shifted then, less patient, more strained. Mom, listen. We're trying to make things easier for you. You don't need to manage all of this anymore. I didn't ask you to take it. You didn't have to. That stopped me. Not because it was loud, because it was honest. I stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The same trees, the same fading light. Nothing outside had changed. Inside, everything had. Rowan, I said, bring me my documents tomorrow. All of them. I'll see what I can find. No, I replied, my voice steady now. You'll bring them. A beat. You're overreacting. Am I? Yes, he said, sharper now. And if you keep going down this road, you're going to make things harder for yourself. Harder. I turned slightly, gripping the curtain between my fingers. Harder than not having access to my own money? I asked quietly. Harder than finding out my life is being managed without me? He didn't answer that. Instead, he said something else. Something colder. We were trying to do this the easy way. I closed my eyes for a second. The easy way? For who? I asked. But the line had already gone dead. I stood there a long moment, the silence pressing in. Then I walked back to the table, placed my hand over the stack of papers, and for the first time since this started, I didn't feel confused. I felt focused. The next morning, I didn't wait for Rowan to come to me. I went to him. His house on Alderwick Drive looked exactly like it always had. Perfect lawn, polished windows, that carefully arranged calm people build when they want others to believe everything inside is under control. Celeste's car was in the driveway. The same deep metallic green SUV my pension had been quietly paying for. I knocked once, then again. Rowan opened the door on the third knock, already tense, already expecting this. Mom, he said, not smiling, you should have called. I did, I replied. You didn't answer. His jaw tightened slightly. We were busy. Of course you were. I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. The house smelled like coffee and something artificial. Vanilla, maybe. Celeste stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, watching me like I'd just walked in with a problem she didn't have time for. Maribel, she said smoothly, this isn't a good morning for this. No, I asked. It's a very good morning for me. Rowan closed the door behind me, not gently. We talked about this yesterday, he said. You're making things bigger than they are. I asked you to bring me my documents, I replied, placing my bag on the table. You didn't. I said I'd look. And I said you'd bring them. Celeste exhaled, slow and controlled. This tone isn't necessary. We're all trying to stay calm. I am calm. And I was. That seemed to unsettle them more than anything. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed transactions, laying them flat on the table between us. Rowan glanced at them, then away, like looking too long might make them real. You've been using my money, I said. Regularly. Systematically. It's temporary, he repeated, but this time it sounded thinner. For how long? No answer. I turned to Celeste. And the storage unit? Her expression didn't change, not a flicker. That's just organization, she said. Your house is overcrowded. We're preparing things for when you decide to move. I didn't decide anything. You will, she replied softly. This is about planning ahead. I held her gaze. You labeled my belongings as an estate. That landed. Rowan shifted. That's standard terminology. For dead people, I cut in. Silence. It stretched long enough to feel like something might finally crack. Instead, Celeste stepped forward and placed a folder on the counter. Neat. Prepared. I didn't want to do this today, she said, but since you're here. Rowan looked at her sharply. Celeste? It's time, she replied, still calm. She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a document. Clean, official, already printed, already waiting. Care authorization and financial oversight agreement. I didn't touch it yet. What is this? I asked, even though I already knew. It's a formality, Celeste said. It allows Rowan to manage things properly. Medical decisions, finances, logistics. So nothing falls through the cracks. I don't have cracks, I said. Maribel. She leaned slightly closer, voice lower now. You couldn't even keep track of your insurance. I felt that one. Not because it was true, because they had made it look true. Rowan stepped in, softer now, almost pleading. Mom, just sign it. It makes everything easier. For everyone. Easier. There it was again. I finally picked up the document, read the first paragraph, then the second. Each line wrapped in careful language. Support, care, best interest. But underneath it all, one simple reality. I would no longer be in control of my own life. I looked up at them, at my son, at the woman who spoke for him. You already took the money, I said quietly. Now you want permission. That's not fair, Rowan snapped. No, I replied. It's accurate. The room went still. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rowan's voice changed. Less patient, less careful. If you don't sign this, he said, things are going to get complicated. I held the paper between my fingers, feeling its weight. Complicated for who? I asked. His eyes didn't move from mine. For you? There it was, not concern, a warning. I set the document back down on the table, unsigned. I'll read it properly, I said. At home. Celeste opened her mouth to object, but I was already reaching for my bag. As I walked to the door, Rowan spoke again. You're making a mistake. I paused, my hand on the handle. Then I said, without turning around, No, Rowan. I think I'm finally seeing one. I stepped outside into the cool morning air and closed the door behind me. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood something clearly. They weren't just taking control. They were preparing to make it permanent. I didn't go home after that. Not right away. Instead, I rode, technically, 2 buses across town to a place I hadn't visited in almost 9 years. A narrow brick building squeezed between a bakery and a travel agency that still advertised cruises no one in Harrow Bend could afford. Nedra Pike, attorney at law. The sign hadn't changed. Slightly faded gold lettering, one corner peeling. Reliable. Unimpressive. Exactly the kind of place where real things got handled. Inside, it smelled like paper and cardamom. The bakery downstairs always seeped through the floorboards. For a moment, I just stood there, letting that smell settle me. Maribel Quince? I turned. Nedra stood in the doorway of her office, glasses low on her nose, silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it kept her thoughts in place. She hadn't changed much either. "You look like someone finally stopped being polite," she said. "That obvious?" "Only to people who've known you long enough." I stepped in. Her office was small. 2 chairs, 1 desk, stacks of folders that looked chaotic until you noticed each one had a colored tab, perfectly aligned. Control disguised as clutter. I placed the documents on her desk. The bank statements. The authorization copy Silas printed. The care agreement. "I need you to tell me what this is," I said. She didn't answer immediately. Just sat down, adjusted her glasses, and started reading. The room went quiet, except for the soft sound of paper turning. 1 page, 2, 3. By the time she reached the care agreement, her expression had changed. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. "That bad?" I asked. She exhaled slowly through her nose. "Worse than you think." That settled something cold in my stomach. "They said it's just to help," I said. "To manage things." Nedra gave a short, humorless smile. "They always say that." She tapped the document with her finger. "This isn't help, Maribel. This is preparation." "For what?" She leaned back slightly, studying me. "For legal control." The words didn't come fast. They came heavy. "If you sign this," she continued, "your son gains formal authority over your finances, medical decisions, potentially your residence. Combined with the existing account access, he wouldn't need to ask you for anything anymore." I didn't react right away. I already knew that part. "What if I don't sign?" I asked. "They pivot." "To what?" Nedra slid the document back toward me and pulled another sheet from the pile. The authorization signature. "This," she said, "and everything around it." I frowned slightly. "That's not my signature." "No," she said calmly, "but it's close enough to argue it is." She leaned forward now. "Here's how this usually goes. Step 1, they help. Step 2, they take over small things, mail, bills, access. Step 3, they build a pattern." "A pattern of what?" "Inconsistency," she said. "Missed payments, confusion, disorganization." I felt something tighten in my chest. "My insurance," I said quietly. She nodded. "Exactly. Then step 4, they present that pattern as evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs." The room felt smaller. "They can do that?" I asked. "They can try," she corrected. "It's called a guardianship petition. If they convince a court, or even raise enough concern, you could temporarily lose control of your finances while things are reviewed." Temporarily. I almost laughed at that word. "And in that time?" I asked. "They control everything." Silence filled the space between us. I looked down at my hands. Steady. Still steady. "They've already moved my things," I said. "Storage. Labeled as an estate." Nedra's jaw tightened slightly. "Then they're further along than I hoped." I lifted my eyes. "So what do I do?" She didn't hesitate this time. "We don't argue with them," she said. "Not yet." That surprised me. "Then what?" "We document. We block access where we can. We gather proof. And most importantly," she held my gaze, firm and direct, "we do not let them control the narrative." "Narrative?" "They think I'm confused," I said. "They need you to be," she replied. That landed deeper than anything else. Nedra leaned back again, calmer now, but sharper. "Tell me something honestly, Maribel. Have you forgotten things lately? Anything that could be used against you?" I thought for a moment. "I forget where I put my glasses sometimes," I said. And once I left the kettle on, she nodded. Good. I blinked. Good? That's normal. That's human. Not incapacity. She tapped the documents again. But combined with missing money, canceled insurance, moved paperwork, it starts to look like something else. I understood now. They weren't just taken. They were arranging. Carefully. Patiently. Like setting a stage. Nedra reached for a notepad and began writing. We're going to move quickly, she said. First, bank. We start limiting access. Second, we verify every transaction. Third, we find out exactly what they've done with your assets. Assets. My life, translated into a colder word. And the document? I asked, nodding toward the care agreement. She glanced at it once more. You keep it, she said, unsigned. I picked it up, sliding it back into my bag. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said quietly, they thought I wouldn't notice. Nedra looked at me over her glasses. No, she said. They thought you wouldn't fight. This is the part that gives me chills. Not the money, not the documents, the planning. When someone builds a case against you while smiling at your table. Tell me honestly, what would you do right here? Personally, I wouldn't argue yet either. I'd start collecting everything. Quietly. We didn't wait long. Nedra said timing mattered, and for once in my life, I didn't hesitate. That same afternoon, Juniper and I drove out to Holloway Storage and Auction Services. Bram insisted on coming too, said he didn't trust places that smell like dust and paperwork. I didn't argue. It felt better not walking into that alone. The building sat on the edge of town, where the pavement gave up and turned into gravel. A wide metal structure, sun-faded, with a sign that looked like it had been repainted too many times. No charm, no warmth, just function. Inside, it was colder than outside. Rows of metal units, concrete floors, the faint smell of cardboard and something older, like forgotten fabric. A man at the desk looked up as we approached. Late 50s, thick glasses, a clipboard already in his hands, like a shield. Can I help you? Yes, I said. I believe you're storing items under the name Quince. He flipped through a few pages. We have several entries. Which one? Maribel Quince? That made him pause. He scanned again, slower this time, then nodded. Unit B-17, authorized by Rowan Quince. Of course it was. I'd like to see it. He hesitated. I'll need to verify. I'm the owner of the items, I said, my voice steady. You can verify me however you like. Another pause, then a reluctant nod. All right, this way. The walk to B-17 felt longer than it should have. Each step echoed too loudly in the narrow corridor. Juniper stayed close. Bram walked slightly ahead, like he already didn't like what we were about to find. The manager unlocked the unit and rolled the metal door up. The sound scraped through the space, like something being dragged open that should have stayed closed. Inside, boxes, stacked carefully, labeled neatly, not random, not temporary, prepared. I stepped closer. The first box I saw had black marker across the top. Estate, Q. My chest tightened, but I kept moving. I opened one. Inside was my sewing tin, the blue one with the dent on the side from when Orville dropped it in 1989. Beneath it, neatly wrapped, were my silver teaspoons, the ones I only used on Sundays. Another box. The porcelain bird from my mantel. Another. Old photo albums. My handwriting on the inside covers. Not clutter, not excess. Pieces of a life, sorted like inventory. Juniper let out a quiet breath beside me. Grandma? I didn't answer. I walked deeper into the unit. And then I saw something that stopped me completely. A smaller box, unmarked. I opened it. Inside was Orville's compass, and next to it, a folded document. I pulled it out slowly. Not an auction form, not a receipt. A valuation sheet. Each item listed, assigned a price. My things, reduced to numbers. I stood there holding that paper, the edges trembling just slightly in my fingers. Not from confusion, not from fear, from something else, something sharper. "They're not preparing," I said quietly. Juniper looked at me. "What do you mean?" I folded the paper once, carefully. "They've already started." The manager shifted uncomfortably behind us. "Ma'am, if there's an issue—" "There is," I said, turning to him. And for the first time since this began, my voice didn't sound unsure. "These items are not to be sold, not listed, not moved. Do you understand?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Bram stepped forward, arms crossed. "You heard her." I placed the valuation sheet back into the box, but not the way I found it. This time, I left it on top, visible, because now I knew exactly what I was looking at. Not help, not care, a quiet liquidation. And I wasn't going to let them finish it. On the way back from Holloway, I didn't say much. Juniper kept glancing at me, like she was waiting for something. Anger, maybe, or a breakdown. Bram just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping lightly against it in a rhythm that felt steady enough to borrow. But I wasn't angry. Not the way people expect. Anger is loud, quick. It burns and disappears. What I felt was quieter, colder, more precise. When Bram dropped me off, the house looked the same as always. White fence, slightly crooked mailbox. The porch step that dipped just enough to remind you it needed fixing. But now I knew something I hadn't known before. They hadn't just taken my money. They had already started deciding what my life was worth. I went inside, locked the door, and didn't take my coat off. Just walked straight to the desk and pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind I used to keep grocery lists in. This one would be different. I opened it and wrote one word at the top. Everything. Then I started listing. Dates, transfers, missing documents, the insurance cancellation, the storage unit, the valuation sheet, the signature that wasn't quite mine. Every detail I could remember, not because I was afraid I'd forget, but because I wanted it all in one place, clear, ordered, undeniable. Halfway down the second page, I stopped. Something didn't fit. I flipped back through the bank statements, spreading them across the desk again. The pattern was there, consistent, deliberate, but one line caught my eye now in a way it hadn't before. A smaller transaction, easy to miss. Voss and Calder, professional services. I hadn't asked Silas about that one. I stared at it for a long moment. Professional services. That wasn't a restaurant, not a lease, not storage. That was paperwork. Legal. I reached for the phone and dialed Nedra. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you found something." "I did," I said. "A payment. Voss and Calder." Silence. Then a sharp exhale on the other end. "All right," she said. "Now we're not guessing anymore." "What is it?" "They're a guardianship firm," she replied. "They prepare petitions, medical reviews, court filings." The room felt smaller again, but this time it didn't overwhelm me. It clarified things. "They've already contacted them," I said. "Yes," Nedra confirmed. "Which means they're not planning. They're building a case." I looked down at the notebook. At the word, everything written across the top. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Not long," she said. Once they file, things move fast. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then we move faster. A brief pause. Then Nedra said almost approvingly, "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I hung up and sat there in the quiet. The house didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt like ground, solid, mine, for now. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting to what they'd done. I was preparing for what they were about to do next. Rowan didn't wait for paperwork. He came the next day, not alone. I saw the car pull up just before noon, his and another one behind it. Clean, unfamiliar. The kind of car that belongs to someone who arrives with authority, not questions. I didn't open the door right away. I watched. Rowan stepped out first, adjusting his jacket like he was about to walk into a meeting. Celeste followed, composed as ever, her expression already arranged into concern. Then a third person, a woman in a navy coat, holding a folder close to her chest. That would be part of it. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mom?" Rowan said, surprised for half a second. Then he recovered. "We need to talk." "I figured," I replied, stepping aside. "You brought company." Celeste gave a small, practiced smile. "This is Iona Bellwether. She works with Family Support Services." Support. Always that word. Iona nodded politely as she stepped in. Her eyes moved quickly, not judging, just observing. The walls, the furniture, me. "I appreciate you letting us visit, Mrs. Quince," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "You arrived anyway." That earned me a brief glance from her. Not offended, just noted. We moved into the living room. No one sat at first. The air felt too tight for that. Rowan cleared his throat. "Mom, we're concerned. Things have escalated." "Have they?" I asked. "Yes," Celeste cut in smoothly. "You've been going to the bank, contacting people, making accusations. It's not like you." "Not like me." "That's because you've been making decisions for me," I said. Rowan's jaw tightened. "We've been trying to protect you." "From what?" He didn't answer. Instead, Iona stepped forward slightly, opening her folder. "Mrs. Quince," she said gently, "your family has expressed concerns about your recent behavior, confusion, financial instability." "My insurance was canceled because my money was redirected," I interrupted. "That's not confusion. That's cause and effect." A flicker in her expression. Small, but there. Rowan moved quickly to regain control. "Mom, this is exactly what I mean. You're connecting things that aren't related." I walked to the table and picked up my notebook, the one with everything written on the first page. Then I turned it toward them. "Then let's go through it," I said. Silence. Rowan didn't step closer. Celeste didn't either. Only Iona did. She scanned the pages, dates, transactions, notes, names. Her eyes slowed at certain points. Holloway, Voss and Calder, the signature. She looked up at Rowan. He didn't meet her gaze. "That's not the full context," he said quickly. "Then give it," I replied. Another pause. Then Celeste stepped in, softer now, almost reassuring. "Maribel, this is exactly why we wanted to formalize things, so there wouldn't be misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" I repeated. "You moved my belongings into storage and labeled them as an estate." "That's terminology." "For dead people," I said again. The room went still. Iona closed the folder slowly. "Mr. Quince," she said, her tone no longer neutral, "I'm going to need clarification on several of these points." Rowan exhaled sharply. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." No, it wasn't. He was supposed to walk in here and present a narrative, a confused mother, a concerned son, a simple solution. Instead, he walked into something else entirely. I stepped closer, not raising my voice, not rushing my words. You said you were helping, I said. So explain it, all of it. He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time since this started, he didn't look certain. I didn't expect them to come back that quickly. But they did. That same evening, just as the light outside turned that dull gray before night settles in, I heard Rowan's car again. This time, only one door closed. I didn't rush to open. I stayed in the kitchen, finishing a slow cup of tea, letting him knock. Once. Twice. Then louder. Mom, I know you're inside. I stood, walked to the door and opened it just enough to see him clearly. Alone. No Celeste. No polished words behind him. Just Rowan. He looked different. Not softer. Not apologetic. Unsteady. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked in without speaking, hands restless, eyes moving around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. Where's Celeste? I asked. At home? A pause. She didn't want to come? She thought this would be better handled between us. That almost made me laugh. Handled. We stood there for a moment, neither of us sitting. Then he said it. You shouldn't have involved that woman. Nedra? I asked. Yes. She's a lawyer, Rowan. That's what people do when something legal is happening to them. His jaw tightened. Nothing legal is happening. I held his gaze. You hired Voss and Calder. That landed. He looked away first. That doesn't mean anything was filed. Yet. Silence stretched between us. Then he ran a hand through his hair, something he used to do as a teenager when he got caught lying about something small. This wasn't small. You're making this worse than it is, he said, but there was no strength behind it now. We were trying to set things up, in case something happened. To me? I asked. Yes. I nodded slowly. And when exactly was that supposed to happen? He didn't answer. I took a step closer. You moved my belongings into storage, I said. You redirected my money. You contacted a guardianship firm. You changed my address. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. And you're telling me this was preparation? Yes, he said, but it came out weaker. For what, Rowan? I asked quietly. My death? Or my disappearance? That hit him. He flinched. Not visibly, but I saw it. That's not fair. No, I said. What you did isn't fair. He exhaled sharply, frustration rising again. You don't understand how hard it's been, he said. Managing everything. The house, the kids, expenses. So you used mine. We were going to pay it back. When? Another silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You didn't even ask, I said. You just decided. We're your family, he snapped. We don't need to ask for help. That was it. That was the truth, finally said out loud. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. You need to ask for permission. He shook his head, pacing now. This is exactly why we needed that agreement. You're being unreasonable. Emotional. I almost smiled at that. Am I? I asked. Yes. Then explain something to me. He stopped. If I'm confused, why does everything you've done make perfect sense on paper? He didn't answer, because he couldn't. I walked past him and picked up the folder from the table, the care agreement. Still unsigned. I held it up between us. This, I said, was the next step, wasn't it? He didn't deny it. That's how you make it official, I continued. How you stop asking entirely. Mom? No, I cut in. You don't get to soften it now. The room felt different, not tense, clear. You didn't help me, Rowan, I said. You replaced me. That one stayed in the air. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief second, I saw something close to regret. But it passed. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. When things get complicated, when you can't handle everything alone. I nodded. Maybe, I said. Then I walked to the door and opened it. But that will be my problem. He stood there for a second, not moving. Then he left. No slam this time. No last word. Just footsteps fading down the path. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the silence settle again. It felt different now. Not empty. Defended. And for the first time since all of this began, I knew exactly where I stood. And so did he. The invitation arrived the next morning. Hand-delivered. Not by Rowan, not by Celeste. A courier. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table, the paper heavier than it needed to be, cream-colored, embossed lettering, the kind of invitation meant to signal importance. Harrow Bend Civic Hall. Community Benefit Evening. Guest speaker, Rowan Quince. Theme, protecting our seniors. I read that line twice, then a third time. Protecting. My fingers pressed slightly into the paper. They weren't hiding anymore. They were building a version of the story where they were the solution, and I was the problem. I picked up the phone and called Nedra. They're going public, I said, as soon as she answered. I was expecting that, she replied. When? Tonight. A pause, then calm and sharp. Good. That gives us just enough time. By evening, Harrow Bend Civic Hall was already full. Soft lights, white tablecloths, glasses catching reflections like everything in the room had been polished for appearance, not truth. People moved easily, smiling, shaking hands, talking about community, support, responsibility. All the right words. I stood just inside the entrance for a moment, taking it in, not hiding, not hesitating, just observing. Then I walked in. No announcement, no hesitation, just presence. A few heads turned. Not many. Not yet. At the front of the hall, Rowan stood near the stage, speaking with a group of people. Local officials, donors, the kind of faces that decide what stories get believed. Celeste was beside him, flawless as ever, her hand resting lightly on his arm, like she was anchoring him to something stable. Juniper stood near the back. She saw me first. Her posture changed immediately, subtle but clear. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just watched, waiting. I took a seat in the second row, close enough to be seen, far enough to not interrupt. Not yet. The program began. A few speeches, introductions, applause at the right moments. Then Rowan's name was announced. He stepped onto the stage like he belonged there. Confident, prepared. My name is Rowan Quince, he began, voice steady, practiced. And tonight, I want to talk about something deeply important. How we care for the people who once cared for us. Applause, of course. I watched him carefully. Every word measured, every pause intentional. There comes a time, he continued, when roles begin to shift, when responsibility changes hands. And in those moments, families are faced with difficult decisions. How to protect, how to support, how to step in when necessary. Necessary. Celeste nodded slightly in the crowd. He went on. talking about vulnerability, about aging, about difficult conversations. And then, sometimes, he said, lowering his voice just enough to draw people in, help doesn't look like what people expect. Sometimes it requires stepping forward, even when it's misunderstood. There it was, the narrative. Care framed as intervention, control framed as protection. I stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood and raised my hand. The room didn't react immediately. Rowan did. His eyes found me before anyone else noticed, and in that split second, everything changed. This right here, this is the moment. A room full of people, polished speeches, applause, and one person holding the truth. What would you do? Stay quiet to keep the peace? Or stand up like this? Me? I wouldn't let someone rewrite my life in front of a crowd, not without answering. The room didn't understand what was happening yet, but Rowan did. His voice stopped mid-sentence. Not dramatically, just a fraction too long, just enough for the silence to stretch in a way that didn't belong in a polished speech. "Mom," he said. A few people turned, then more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. "I have a question," I said. Simple, clear, the kind that doesn't sound like a threat, until it is. The moderator shifted slightly near the stage, unsure whether to intervene. Rowan forced a small smile, trying to regain control. "Of course," he said, gesturing lightly. "That's my mother, Maribel Quince." A few polite nods, a ripple of recognition. Perfect. Now they knew who I was. "Go ahead," he added, but his eyes said something else entirely. "Be careful." I stepped a little closer into the aisle, not breaking eye contact. "You said sometimes help is misunderstood," I began. "So, I'd like you to explain something clearly, for everyone." The room quieted. Rowan's shoulders tightened. "What exactly were you protecting me from?" I asked, "when you redirected my pension into your mortgage?" It landed, not like a shout, like something placed carefully in the center of the room. People didn't react immediately. They processed. Rowan's smile didn't disappear, but it changed, thinner, tighter. "That's not an appropriate discussion for—" "And the storage unit?" I continued, not louder, just steadier. "Holloway storage, where my belongings are labeled as an estate." Now the shift was visible, heads turning, whispers starting. Celeste moved first, stepping forward from the crowd. "Maribel, this isn't the place." "No," I said, turning slightly toward her. "This is exactly the place." Then back to Rowan. "You're speaking about protecting seniors," I said. "So let's be specific." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet. Not everything, just enough. A transaction record. Clear, clean, undeniable. I held it up, not waving it, not dramatic. Just visible. "Monthly transfers," I said. 6 months, same date, same account. The room had gone completely still now. Rowan stepped forward slightly, his voice dropping. "You're confused. You don't understand." "I understand numbers," I said. "I always have." A quiet ripple moved through the audience. He tried again, faster this time. "This is a family matter. My mother has been under stress, and she's misinterpreting." Then explain Voss and Calder. That stopped him. Completely. No smooth recovery, no prepared line, just silence. I watched it happen. The exact moment he realized the story he'd built wasn't going to hold. Not here. Not like this. Behind him, I saw Iona Bellwether step forward from the side of the room, not interrupting, just present, watching. That mattered. "Rowan," I said, softer now but sharper, "you told them help sometimes looks different." I took one more step forward. "So show them." The silence stretched. too long, too real. Then from somewhere behind me, a voice, low, uncertain. Is this true? Another voice followed, then another. The room wasn't quiet anymore. It was shifting. And Rowan, for the first time since he walked onto that stage, had nothing to say. Rowan tried to recover. I saw it happen in real time. The shift from shock to calculation, the quick assembling of something that could still sound reasonable if he said it fast enough. This is being taken out of context, he said, louder now, turning slightly toward the audience instead of me. My mother has been under a lot of stress and… No, I said, not loud, but it cut through him. The room quieted again. You don't get to explain me, I continued. Not anymore. Celeste stepped forward again, this time faster, the calm slipping at the edges. Maribel, you're embarrassing yourself. This isn't how… I turned to her. No, I said. This is exactly how. That stopped her. Not because of volume, because there was nothing left to soften. I reached into my bag again, and this time pulled out more than one page. Not everything Nedra had prepared, just enough to make denial impossible. The valuation sheet from Holloway, the authorization signature, the Voss and Calder payment. I handed them, not to Rowan, but to Iona. Since we're discussing protection, I said, you should probably see what was being done in my name. Iona took the papers without hesitation. That mattered more than anything Rowan could say. She didn't speak immediately. Just read. Rowan stepped toward her. You don't have the full picture. Then give it, she said calmly, not looking up. He stopped. Because there was no version of this that helped him now. The room shifted again. But this time it wasn't confusion. It was judgment. I could feel it. People leaning forward, watching, reassessing everything they'd just applauded. Celeste's voice came sharper now. This is private. These documents shouldn't even be here. They were private, I replied, until you started building a case out of my life. That line stayed. I saw it land. Rowan tried one last time. You're twisting this, he said. We were trying to make sure you were taken care of. You've been forgetting things, missing payments. You took the payments, I said. Silence. Absolute this time. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Nothing left. Behind him, one of the council members leaned toward another, whispering something that didn't look supportive anymore. A man near the front shook his head slowly. Someone else pulled out their phone. Not to record, but to check something. Maybe a name. Maybe a connection. The room was turning, and Rowan felt it. I saw it in his shoulders, the way they dropped just slightly. Not surrender, but the first crack in certainty. Say it, I told him quietly. He looked at me. Really looked this time. Not like I was confused. Not like I was a problem. Like I was something he hadn't planned for. Say what? He asked. The truth, I said. Another pause. Longer than before. Then, barely controlled. We needed the money. There it was. Not everything, but enough. Celeste closed her eyes for a second, like she knew the moment had slipped past recovery. And the rest? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Iona closed the folder slowly. Mr. Quince, she said, her tone no longer neutral. I'll need you to come with me after this. There are several things we need to review immediately. Not a request, a direction. The moderator stepped forward, unsure, trying to contain something that was already beyond containing. Perhaps we should, take a short break. but no one was listening to him anymore. The event was over. It just hadn't been announced yet. Rowan didn't argue. That was the clearest sign of all. He just stood there for a moment, then nodded once. Small? Defeated. Celeste didn't follow him immediately. She looked at me instead, something sharp and bitter behind her composure. "You've destroyed everything," she said quietly. I held her gaze. "No," I replied. "You did. I just stopped it." She didn't answer, didn't try again. Just turned and followed Rowan. The room began to move again, slowly at first, then all at once. Conversations, questions, distance. People who had been close to Rowan minutes ago were no longer standing near him. That's how fast it happens. I stayed where I was, not because I didn't know what came next, but because for the first time in all of this, I wasn't being moved. I wasn't being managed. I wasn't being explained. I was exactly where I chose to be. And that was enough. It didn't end that night. Things like that never do. For the town, it was a scandal that would be talked about for a few weeks. Quiet conversations in cafes, lowered voices in grocery store aisles, people saying, "Did you hear what happened at Civic Hall?" and pretending they weren't listening for more. For Rowan, it became something else entirely. An investigation. I didn't attend any of the meetings that followed. I didn't sit in rooms while people asked him questions he should have asked himself months ago. Nedra handled what needed to be handled. I signed what needed to be signed. This time, every page read, every line understood. The accounts were restored, slowly, carefully, every transfer traced, every authorization reviewed. Some of the money came back, not all of it. It rarely does. Celeste's business closed within 2 months, quietly at first, then all at once. Clients don't like uncertainty. Investors like it even less. Rowan lost more than money. His position at the community program was withdrawn before the investigation even finished. Officially, it was pending review. Unofficially, no one wanted a man who spoke about protecting people while building a case against his own mother. He came by once, just once. No documents, no arguments, just him. I didn't invite him in. We stood on opposite sides of the same door that used to mean something else entirely. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. I believed him. That was the worst part. "You didn't think I would notice," I replied. He didn't argue with that. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to know. The one who used to ask me how to fix things when they broke. But this wasn't something you fix with glue and patience. "I can make it right," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I answered. "You can take responsibility." That's not the same thing. He stood there a second longer, then nodded once, and left. No promises. No dramatics. Just the sound of gravel under his shoes as he walked away. The house stayed. That mattered more than I expected. Not because of the walls or the furniture, but because it was still mine. Not as a memory. Not as an asset. As a place where decisions happened because I made them. Juniper visits often now. Not out of obligation. Just because. She helped me bring things back from Holloway. Not everything. Some things I let go of. Not because they were taken, but because I chose to release them. There's a difference. We turned the spare room into something new. A long table. Good light. A place where papers don't get hidden, they get read. Word travels faster than people admit. It didn't take long before others started showing up. Neighbors, strangers, people with quiet questions and folders they didn't understand. "Can you look at this?" Does this seem right? They said they were helping. I don't give speeches. I don't tell them what to do. I just sit with them, go line by line, and show them where the numbers stop making sense. That's enough. Sometimes. This morning, I received another envelope from the bank. I opened it at the table, sunlight coming through the window just the way it always has. Inside, a statement. Clear, simple, accurate. My pension, my savings, exactly where they were supposed to be. I ran my finger once along the edge of the paper, then set it down beside my tea. Still warm this time. That felt important. People think stories like this end with forgiveness. They don't. They end with clarity. And sometimes, distance. I don't hate my son, but I don't trust him. And for the first time in a very long time, those two things are allowed to exist together. I'll say this plainly. If I were in her place, I wouldn't give control back just because someone says sorry. Trust isn't words, it's patterns. And once you see the pattern, you don't ignore it again. If this story hit you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, where would you draw the line between helping family and losing yourself?